Goodner. This is for the storytelling class in the summer of 2014. And the story I'm going to tell is Little Red Riding Hood. Alright, once upon a time lived a little girl called Red Riding Hood. And the reason she was called Red Riding Hood is because her grandmother made her a lovely cape of red velvet, just like this one. Feel it, feel it. Does it feel good? Okay. Alright, and her grandmother and her were very close. So one day her grandmother got sick, and her mother said, why don't you go and visit your grandmother and take her this cake. See, the cake's already flying apart. This cake that I made for her, and this juice, and it'll help her feel better. And Little Red Riding Hood said, sure, Mother, I'd love to go and see Grandmother and give her the cake and juice to help her feel better. So as she started off, her mother said, please be careful as you're going through the woods. Do not stray off the path. There are strange things in the woods and you could get hurt. So Little Red Riding Hood said, oh, Mama, I'll be so careful. I'll be so, so careful. And she put on her cape and her gloves and she started off down the path. And as soon as she got into the woods, she started humming to herself. Then she ran into this huge, huge wolf. But the wolf was really friendly to her. He said, hey, little girl, what are you doing in these woods? Where are you going? And Little Red Riding Hood said, a talking wolf. And he's really, really nice. I guess I'll tell him where I'm going. And then she turned to the wolf and she said, I'm going to my grandmother's house, Mr. Wolf. You're so nice and so smart. And the wolf said, and I bet in that basket you've got some cookies and some milk for your wherever you're going. And she said, well, actually, no. I have cake and juice for my grandmother. And he said, oh, I bet I know where you're going. Your grandmother must live in that huge cottage in the woods under the trees. And she said, Mr. Wolf, you are so smart. That's exactly where my grandmother lives. And so he said, he looked at the girl again and he said, this little girl looks delicious. It's been an age since I've had anything half as delicious as her, but I'm going to have to be sneaky in order to eat her. So he began to smile as she walked on, and he ran up and kept pace with her. And as they were walking, he said, oh, little girl, look how beautiful these flowers are. Listen to the birds. Chirp, 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 chirp. Look at the beautiful clouds as they roll across the sky. And Little Red Riding Hood stopped and she looked and she listened. And as she heard the birds and as she saw the sky and the flowers, she said, nature is so beautiful. And the wolf began to smile to himself. And he said, why, little girl, don't you think some flowers would help your grandmother feel better? And Little Red Riding Hood said, oh yeah, I bet they would. And he said, well, you got plenty of time until it gets dark. Why don't you stop and pick her some flowers? So Little Red Riding Hood began to pick the flowers. And as she began to pick the flowers, the wolf ran through the woods as fast as he could to Grandmother's house. When he got to Grandmother's house, the door was closed. So he knocked on the door. Knock, knock, knock. And the grandmother said, who's there? And the wolf said, it's me, Little Red Riding Hood. I came to bring you some cake and some juice. And the grandmother said, oh, okay, the door's open. Come in. So he rushed in the house, and in one leap, he was on the grandmother, and he ate her and gobbled her up whole. But as Little Red Riding Hood was picking flowers, she became further and further from the path. And after a little while, she was a little bit lost. And the further she got from the path, the more and more lost she got, and the darker it was. Finally, when she saw the sun begin to set, she said, I better find the path and get to Grandmother's before it gets dark. So she finally found the path and walked through, and as she walked, it got darker and darker. By the time she got to her grandmother's house, it was pitch black dark. And she could tell from the light on in the house that the door was open. And she thought, how strange. Why is Grandmother's door open? So she walked in slowly and cautiously. And as she walked in, she saw her grandmother laying in the bed with her back turned to her. And she said, Grandmother, are you okay? Mama said you're sick. And the wolf, who is the grandmother in disguise, turned over. And Little Red Riding Hood said, "Oh my goodness, grandmother, what big eyes you have." And the wolf said, "The better to see you with, my dear." And then she said, "Oh my goodness, grandmother, what big ears you have." And the wolf said, "The better to hear you with, my dear." And then Little Red Riding Hood said, "Oh my, what big hands you have, grandmother." And he said, "The better to hug you with, sweet child." And then she said, "Grandmother, what a big, huge, gigantic, enormous mouth you have." And the wolf said, "The better to eat you with," and jumped on Little Red Riding Hood, and in one bite he had her gobbled whole. Now, I don't know if you know it or not, but when wolves have a full stomach, they like to take a nap. So the wolf curled up in the bed, he pulled the covers up to his chin, and he began to snore. And wolves snore enormous, obnoxious sounds. And as the wolf was snoring, a huntsman was coming through the woods, and he heard this terrible noise coming out of the old woman's cabin, and he said to himself, "I wonder if the old woman's having a nightmare. Maybe I should go and check on her." And so he came into the cabin, and he saw the door open. He thought, "Well, this is really strange." He went into the bedroom. Now, the wolf wasn't as easily fooled as the huntsman wasn't as easily fooled as Little Red Riding Hood. The minute he saw that shape laying in the bed, he knew it wasn't the old woman. He knew it was the wolf, and not just any wolf. The same wolf that he'd been hunting for years and years and years. He grabbed his rifle, and in an instant he nearly shot the wolf, but he thought to himself, "How strange. This wolf is sleeping in the old woman's bed. I bet he ate her. And if he ate her and I shoot him, it'll kill the old woman too." So he began to think, and he walked around the house and searched and searched. And finally, he found the old woman's sewing basket. And in the sewing basket, he found a pair of scissors. And when he found the scissors, he said, "This is a perfect way to get the old woman out of the wolf." So he rolled the wolf onto his back where his stomach was exposed, and he took the scissors and he snipped the wolf's stomach open. Snip, snip, snip. And he saw a sliver of red velvet. Snip, snip. And all of a sudden a little girl popped out, and he said, "What are you doing in this wolf's stomach, little girl?" And she said, "I came to visit my grandmother. She's still in there. You have to get her out." So again, snip, 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 snip. And finally the old woman popped out, and she said, "Thank you so much, Mr. Huntsman, for rescuing us. We never thought we'd escape from the big bad wolf." And so finally the wolf was dead. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother were rescued. And the grandmother wasn't even sick anymore. She was so happy at being rescued. So she and the huntsman and Little Red Riding Hood sat down and ate the cake and the juice that Little Red Riding Hood had bought. And as they sat there and ate, they thought, "Well, how can we keep this wolf from ever eating anyone else?" And the huntsman said, "We'll sew his belly up with rocks and throw him in the river." So that's exactly what they did. And Little Red Riding Hood learned her lesson, where she never strayed from the path again as she wandered through the woods. The end. Thank you. This has been a presentation by Hope Goodner and the softball team of Wilkinson County High School. Say hey, girls.
Hey.
Oh, hi.
Thank you, Jenna.
Over.